I've seen this moment in my dreams.
It's total bullshit. Welcome back everyone to the Boto spaceship. I'm your captain, Mayara, and tonight we have another in-depth analysis, this time about historical combat, but instead of talking about a game, I'm gonna talk about a movie. Yes, I know a lot of people in the community of the sword have analyzed the 2004 movie Troy, more specifically the famous duel between Hector and Achilles. I will definitely talk about the duel, but I wanted to also talk about other aspects of the movie, like weapons, armor, etc. Linda Beige is one YouTuber that uploaded some videos on that, but everything I'm going to say here is based on my research about the Bronze Age, so if you disagree, it's okay, we can have a civil discussion in the comments. I want to say that I'm not here just to talk shit about the movie, as you will see throughout the video. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only, so without further ado,
shall we begin?
Let me start by saying that I actually like this movie very much. Yes, I know that as an adaptation of the Iliad, the movie has some flaws, like the siege of Troy not lasting anywhere near the 10 years it was supposed to last, Paris not being treated like the asshole that he is, and the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus not being faithfully portrayed. But that's not what I'm gonna focus on right now, and despite all that, I think the movie aged reasonably well, and I will talk a little bit about why I think the movie has some redeeming qualities throughout the video. So I won't go very in-depth about this subject in this video, but I feel like I should at least mention it quickly for educational purposes. When the Greeks arrive at Troy, we see the Trojan soldiers shooting incendiary arrows at them. Fire arrows are something we see very often in movies about ancient and medieval times, but the truth is that there isn't much evidence to suggest there was something commonly done, the reasons being it would be ineffective and pointless. The speed of the flying arrow would extinguish the fire, and if the arrow is launched at a lower speed to prevent that, it wouldn't penetrate anything, and the purpose of the arrow is lost. Apparently, there is an example in history of incendiary crossbow bolts being used in the siege of Oran in 1404. The attackers used the projectiles to set fire to houses and buildings. But that's basically as effective as it gets for fire arrows. Against infantry? Forget it, it wouldn't do anything. Armor wasn't very flammable, and as I said, the arrow wouldn't have enough force to penetrate the armor, and it probably wouldn't do much harm to flesh either. So if the Trojan soldiers wanted to do real damage, they should be shooting those arrows at the Greek ships instead. There is also no evidence that archers shot arrows pointing upwards. When we look at depictions of battles across history, we see archers pointing forwards directly at the target. There's no way I'll be able to talk about the armor of every character, so I'm only talking about Agamemnon, Hector, and Achilles. Let's start with the villain. I don't know if it's just me, but I find the way they designed the armor in this movie a bit weird. When I first saw Agamemnon's armor, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Is the armor made of beads or small pieces of wood or something like that? But there are moments when the lighting changes and we can see it's actually made of bronze pieces, despite also having some colorful beads as decoration. So the bronze makes sense considering the story is set during the Bronze Age, but the way they applied the bronze on the armor is still weird. In that specific area of Europe and in that specific period, what we see most is plate and scale armor. I've never seen evidence or depictions of Bronze Age armors made of tiny squares of bronze of various sizes, and speaking in practical terms, the presence of beads in a cuirass is kinda silly. Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, so let's take a look at the Mycenaean armor from the Bronze Age. This is the Dendra armor, or panoply. It consists of many curved bronze plates that form a long cuirass with shoulder guards, arm guards, shin guards, and a neck guard. The helmet was made of slivers of boar tusks with bronze cheek guards, and it could contain some decoration at the top like a horsetail and even horns. You can see that they actually kept the tubular shape of the armor in the movie. The silhouette is the same, but the movie version has a lot of gaps, making it much more vulnerable, and the shoulder guards are missing. The helmet's shape is also similar, but the material and structure are very different, and I'm gonna talk more about the helmets later. I know that they wanted to make his armor very ornate because he's a king, but they could have done that with an accurate design for sure. Now about Hector. First of all, I have to say that overall the Trojan armor design looks way better than the Greek one. You can see that the Trojans are using bronze cuirasses, bronze armor guards, and shin guards, despite the cuirasses being way too detailed in my opinion. If it was just Hector's armor that looked like that, I'd give it a pass because he's a prince, but his armor is very similar to the other Trojan soldiers, which I find weird. I think he should stand out more among his army, but I digress. The Greek armor design, however, just looks off. They don't even seem to be made of metal or any hard material. It's this weird texture, like it's some sort of modern leather or rubber. But anyway, back to Hector. The Prince of Troy has a nice looking set of armor, as I said. His lower arms are protected like his shins. He is wearing this sort of tunic underneath, and the bronze of his armor is very bright and shiny as it should be. But there are still some historical inconsistencies. One pattern with this movie is the absence of shoulder guards. Seriously, everybody seems to enjoy leaving their shoulders exposed in this movie, what the fuck. Hector, unfortunately, is no different, and regarding his cuirass, as I said, it probably wouldn't have been that detailed even considering his status, and according to some archaeological findings from Thebes and artistic depictions of the peoples that lived in the Mediterranean region, it was most likely a segmented cuirass like this one. The accurate parts of his helmet are the shape, the material, which is bronze, and the horsetail on the top. But some aspects on the helmet's structure are wrong, like the nasal guard, which was not a thing yet, and the cheek guards. The way they made his helmet was as the dome and the cheek guards were parts of one single piece. An accurate helmet would have the cheek guards as two separate pieces that were attached to the dome, like the helmet I showed for Agamemnon. The kind of structure we see in all three helmets, Agamemnon, Hector, and Achilles, has the same problem. It's too modern for that time period. Keep in mind that this is not classical Greece, it's the Greek Bronze Age, so the helmets are not developed to the designs we are used to seeing yet. And besides the horsetail, Hector's helmet would probably also be decorated with horns, since the combination of those two ornaments was very common in helmets of that period. His shield would most likely have been a figure of 8 type shield or a proto-dipylon shield. It would have been made of layers of cowhide framed with wood, and maybe it would have some bronze parts. In the movie, it's very hard to determine what shields are made of, but judging by the sound that they make, I would guess they are made of wood and covered with bronze. If that's the case, it's total bullshit. Look at the size of the shields. Making them with wood and covering them with metal would make them too heavy and impractical. There are archaeological findings of Bronze Age round shields being made completely of bronze, but it's hard to determine if they were actually used in combat or if they were just ceremonial items. Keep in mind that bronze is a very soft metal, much softer than iron or steel, so it deforms much easier depending on the thickness. The bronze shields found were made of a very thin sheet of bronze, so if the shield was ever hit many times by a sword or any other weapon, it would probably bend and deform very quickly. But now let's talk about the demigod himself, Achilles. Despite the fact that he's technically on the Greek side, his armor is very different from the rest of the Greek soldiers. His cuirass is made of bronze plates on the upper torso and black leather on the lower torso. He also wears bronze greaves and arm guards. But I don't know why the fuck the metal parts of his armor keep changing colors throughout the movie. There are moments where the whole armor looks black, but in the next scene the bronze looks very bright, but then it looks black again. Like, why? Why is that happening? And as I mentioned before, this type of leather that they used for his armor throws me off so much. It looks so modern. I can't be sure because I'm not an expert in leather, but it just looks wrong to me. And if you know me, you know I'm all for being completely in black. I love me some leather, but in so many movies about medieval times and antiquity, there is this misconception that every single person only used black or brown leather, which is very far from the truth. People in the Bronze Age, the classical times, and medieval times loved color. They were people just like us. If you look for artistic reproductions of the Bronze Age, you'll see how colorful the clothing and armor were. Not only the Greeks, but the Celts, the Saxons, and much later on the Viking and medieval people. But this is a rant for another time. Back to Achilles. His helmet, as I said, also has a design that's too advanced for that period, and it's probably made of bronze but painted black. However, despite its design being quite historically inaccurate, the structure of his cuirass seems to be inspired by those findings in Thebes we talked about earlier. Since most of the archaeological findings regarding armor consisted of shoulder guards and small bronze strips, it's assumed that this structure of armor was very plausible. A cuirass that had bronze only protecting the shoulders and the upper chest, and the rest being made of some perishable material that can't be determined. When we look at the movie version, we can see that Achilles' armor gets closer than any other to having shoulder guards, but they're still very small. I guess nobody wanted to cover up Brad Pitt's biceps. So, considering the fact that Achilles was a sort of elite warrior, the most accurate armor choice for him would be either a segmented cuirass similar to Hector's or the Dendra armor we talked about before. I think the latter would be the best option since it offered the best protection money could buy at that time, and because of the high neck guard, his helmet probably didn't even need to have cheek guards, since many helmets of that time were like that. And it would certainly have the decorations I mentioned before. Apparently, Homer alluded to the fact that Achilles' helmet had horns in the original text. The shape of his shield in the movie is actually accurate. It's a proto-dipylon shield. The only difference is that, again, it would be made of cowhide and wood. I found this small thread on Twitter made by the user ArcGreek. showing an image comparing the movie armors with the historically accurate armors. It was photoshopped by Patrick Robinson Art and Animation, based on reconstruction pictures by Hellenic Armors. I'm gonna link the thread below if you wanna check it out, cause there you'll also find a text where the creator of the image explains his thought process when choosing and researching the armor if you want more context. I think his vision is super on point, although probably not sexy enough for Hollywood standards. First of all, can someone tell me what the fuck is going on with the spears in this movie? Not only they seem to break like nothing, more on that later, but they don't even seem to be made of the right metal. At first I thought it was the lighting, but through the entire movie the spearheads seem to be made of this dark iron kind of metal. Like, this is the Bronze Age. You know the spearheads were also made of bronze, right? Like, the spears are supposed to be glowing and shining without the sunlight hitting them, but they always look dark and gray. Like, look at this frame. And this one. You're not gonna convince me those spearheads are made of bronze. Why does everything in this movie has to look dark and gray? Let's just move on. Another cliche very present in this movie is the one I'm gonna call weak bow syndrome. It's when we see skinny actors and extras pulling long bows like they are not making any effort and keeping them drawn for like minutes sometimes. And that happens a lot with female characters. Oh, I'm gonna talk about you in a future video, sweetie, don't you worry. The thing is, long bows are fucking heavy. To draw a longbow, you need years and years of experience, and you need a strong arm. Even if you have a strong arm, there's no way you're gonna be able to keep a longbow drawn like this. I'm sorry, Orlando, I know you must have worked out a lot for this movie, but you still wouldn't have been able to even draw the bow all the way. If you see someone drawing a bow this easily in a combat situation, it means the bow is very weak and therefore very ineffective. I'm gonna show a quick excerpt from a video by Todd's Workshop about bows versus plate armor, just to illustrate my point. The full video is gonna be in the description.
Basically, in your physique, in the weapon, you've gone through the process from childhood that they went through in the 15th century.
Yeah.
You grew up with it?
Yeah, I grew up with a bow. Shot since I was 14, 15, sort of like 100 pounds plus.
Yeah.
And I shoot 2 to 3 times a week.
So what's the draw weight on this bow?
160 pounds at 30 inches.
That's pretty heavy. That's a lot heavier than most people would shoot.
Yeah, it is these days, yeah.
But finally, let's talk about swords. Overall, the swords in this movie seem kinda accurate, but let's dive deeper. Achilles' sword is loosely inspired by the usual types of Bronze Age swords. It seems to be a mix of the Urnfield and the Wilburton types. The blade gets very narrow at the point, which resembles the Wilburton, but the hilt looks more like an Urnfield because of the number of rivets and how they are placed, but it doesn't have a pommel, which is uncommon, unless you consider that a pommel, which I don't, and the hilt for this type would probably also be made of bronze, but the wooden hilt is also accurate. The shape of the blade is different, but it's not too far off. It has a sort of leaf shape to it, and it still seems to contain the same amount of heft in the blade as an accurate version would. It still reminds us of historically accurate bronze swords, but in my opinion, it doesn't reflect how beautiful those swords really were, but I'll talk more about that later. Hector's sword, unfortunately, is probably my least favorite in the movie. The blade doesn't have much of a leaf shape, it's more straight, which resembles the carp's tongue type of bronze sword, although it doesn't taper too much at the point, which is more like an Urnfield. But the hilt seems to be completely made up. It has this weird round piece between the hilt and the blade, and the hilt itself seems too thick in relation to the blade when compared to actual Bronze Age swords that have been found. And once again, what's with this muddy shade of bronze they used? Why is the blade so dark? He's a prince! Why does it seem like somebody smeared shit all over the sword? You can see that they tried to decorate the blade a bit, but come on, let the bronze shine. But hey, at least it has a pommel. Sort of. Agamemnon's sword design is very good. The shape of the hilt, where it meets the blade, the proportions, and even the pommel are very accurate. If the blade had a leaf shape, it would be almost identical to this sword found in Hungary. I like the decorations on the blade and the hilt, but come on guys, what's with the color? Okay, I'm repeating myself. Next, the Sword of Troy. Now this one is kinda similar to Hector's sword, with that circle and the hilt, and it doesn't have a pommel, but the blade is nice and they finally allowed the bronze to shine. That's how a Bronze Age sword should look like, shiny and bright and beautiful. Bronze, in my opinion, is the most beautiful metal there is, and it would have been so cool if the movie had shown that, if it had shown how colorful the Bronze Age really was. Filmmakers, artists, please don't let this clown give you any ideas. Put color and contrast in your movie. The ancient world and the medieval world were colorful. Of course, they didn't have all the colors and dyes that we have today, but they did have vibrant colors. It wasn't this dirty, muddy, gray world that most movies portray. So, which sword is more accurate? In terms of design and shape, Agamemnon's sword wins. But in terms of showing how the metal looked like, the Sword of Troy does a better job. So it's a draw, I guess. Now, let's take a quick break from ranting to appreciate the casting of this movie, which is, in my opinion, one of the reasons this movie aged well besides the dialogue. First, we have some legends like Brian Cox and Peter O'Toole. Both do an amazing job at portraying two very different types of kings, Agamemnon, who is a cruel and power-hungry king, and Priam, who is a kind and wise king, although some of his naive decisions are the very cause of Troy's fall. Sean Bean is great as Odysseus as usual. Diane Kruger is a very decent actress and she fits perfectly as Helen. Although Homer only gave her vague descriptions, she seems like she has come straight out of one of the many artistic depictions that portray the character. When talking about the supposedly most beautiful woman in the world, she certainly looks the part. Orlando Bloom does a decent enough job as Paris, but Eric Bana and Brad Pitt really shine in this movie. Eric Bana did a great job showing how Hector was an honorable and good man, and also a very skilled and respected warrior. It's very easy to like him. And Brad Pitt not only fits perfectly Achilles' description, but he also portrays very well the character's combat skills, his temper, and his ego. Both actors gave their respective characters the dramatic weight they needed to be great protagonists, and that really shows in the scene where they finally get to face each other. So let's talk about it right now. This has to be one of the most iconic duels I've ever seen in movies. In terms of movie fight choreography, I think this fight is very well done. It's very dynamic and agile, and it manages to convince the audience that both Hector and Achilles are very skilled fighters. However, right now we are talking about realism and historical accuracy, so I'm gonna judge this fight based on that. Let's begin by appreciating this piece of dialogue.
I thought it was you I was fighting yesterday. And I wish it had been you. But I gave the dead boy the honor he deserved.
Gave him the honor of your sword. You won't have eyes tonight. You won't have ears or a tongue. You will wander the underworld blind, deaf, and dumb, and all the dead will know. This is Hector, the fool who thought he killed Achilles.
Like I said, dramatic weight done right. It's very nice to see that when the fight begins, they're both kinda moving to find an opening in the other's defense. And there we go. Achilles attacks with his spear and Hector evades. However, we already see a major flaw with both of their defenses that will come up many times during this fight. They don't keep their shields in front of them. The shield is there for protection. It makes no sense that they leave the shield to their sides and sometimes even on their backs. Keep the shield in front of you and attack around it. I haven't looked into sword and shield fighting too much yet, or even spear and shield fighting for that matter, but that's common knowledge for everybody that practices HEMA. So Hector would have been safer if he raised his shield here to protect him from the spear. See how he raised his shield now? That's much better. And we also see Achilles attempting his first jumping attack, which is kinda his signature move in the movie. Unfortunately, in real life, this attack would not be very effective, since the opponent can easily tell what you're about to do and defend. And when he landed, you see his defense is down, so Hector could probably have taken advantage of that. I think Achilles would have been a bit exposed when he landed, so probably not a smart move to make. Hector uses his shield again to defend this attack on his legs. However, in this situation, he should have just taken his leg out of the way, because now he's lowering his shield and his head is exposed, especially because he's not wearing his helmet. Achilles could have used this opportunity to hit him in the head with his own shield, but of course he doesn't. Hector uses a cutting motion here to attack Achilles, but that wouldn't be very effective with a spear, which is a weapon much more focused on thrusting. It would be much more plausible to use a cutting motion with a spear if Achilles had his spear in front of his body and Hector wanted to get it out of the way to create an opening for an attack. Oh, for God's sake, Hector, raise your fucking shield. Hector, Achilles is down here. Why the fuck did he attack so high? And why Achilles had his shield so high too? That's just weird. This is a nice example of attacking while still defending with your shield. Another cutting motion with a spear. This one would be very ineffective since he's holding the spear quite far down the shaft, so the blow would have very little power. This is a bit stupid. They make it seem like Achilles' spear is stuck, but it isn't. He can just pull it back. What the fuck? Oh yes, that's what I was talking about when I said that spears in this movie break like nothing. Like, there's absolutely no way you can break a spear in half by hitting it with a shield once. No way at all. You can't even do it with a sharp sword. You would ruin your sword and your shield if you tried to do that. Spears were made of very resistant wood. They were thrusting weapons, they had to be. Especially Hector, being a prince, he would have the best equipment available. There's just no way this could happen. Realistically, Achilles would just knock the spear to the side if he did that. The other spear breaks. Like I said, not very plausible, but more plausible than the other one because of the position of the spear this time. But I like the way that Hector drew his sword as an attack. It looks very good. Oh god, there we go. Achilles spins while he draws his sword. This has been talked about a lot at this point, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Spinning in a fight with a sharp implement is not a good idea. Don't turn your back to an opponent who can just thrust through your lungs as you try to look cool. Yes, in UFC you see fighters executing spinning kicks and spinning punches, but that is unarmed combat. It's different. If your opponent has a weapon in their hand, don't do it. That's nice. Hector's sword bounced off when hitting Achilles' shin guards. That's what Armour does. That's why people used it. Whenever you see somebody slicing through someone else's armor with a sword in a movie, it's bullshit. What the fuck was that? Did he just hit Hector on the knee with his shield? What the fuck? Now, I need to tell you something about their fighting style. When it comes to ancient Greece, we don't have written manuals or treatises from that time period like we have from the 14th century onwards that can show us their fighting system. But we can certainly make some educated assumptions based on the design of the weapons and their metal. Remember when I told you bronze is much softer than iron and steel and that it deforms easy? That's why they probably would try to work around the opponent's shield and sword and avoid hitting them so much as they do here. Because hitting a hard surface like that many times with a bronze sword would damage the edge very quickly and the blade would start to bend. And also because Bronze Age swords were riveted, making their structure more fragile than, for example, an early medieval arming sword. Their fighting style also probably didn't encourage the binding of blades. You know, that classic moment when the characters press their swords against one another with angry looks? And that's because when you bind, there is a huge risk of your opponent's blade sliding down your blade and hitting your hand, since, as you probably saw already, Bronze Age swords don't have guards like medieval swords. That's why medieval combat includes binding, because your hand is protected by the guard. So yeah, the point of Achilles' sword would not be looking good right now if it did this in real life. Also, those huge cutting motions they're doing should not be that huge. Bronze Age swords were much smaller and quicker than later types of swords, so they wouldn't need to be swung like that. Shorter swings are much better because they would be keeping their swords closer to the front of their bodies, so they would attack quicker and they'd be more protected since they refuse to raise their shields. You don't even need such large motions when fighting with long swords, so it makes even less sense with short swords like those. You were that close to his neck and head and you chose to hit him with your elbow? Okay then. I love how through the entire movie Achilles has just been slaughtering people left and right with that jumping attack, but Hector survives it twice, showing his superior skills. It shows that a good fight in a movie not only looks good, but also adds to the characters and the story. Like here, the only person who gets this close to actually hurting Achilles in a duel is Hector. And look at his face, he's actually taken aback for a second, because he's so used to people being unable to touch him. That's very nice. Once again, his head is right there. Hit it with the fucking shield.
Get up, Prince of Troy. Get up. Won't let a stone take my glory.
We see Achilles' ego here again, when he just tosses his shield aside. I mean, he can kinda get away with it, cause he's a demigod, but in a historical real situation, nobody would do that, not if their shield was still in perfect condition. Please stop spinning. It's stupid. More points to storytelling here. For the first and only time, we see Achilles actually being out of breath, showing how Hector is giving him a hard time despite being only human. Here we see Hector really pressing the offense and making Achilles back away, but in a real fight, Hector wouldn't be that intimidating right now, cause he's telegraphing all his attacks, so the opponent can easily anticipate his movements and defend. A skilled fighter not only trains how to execute attacks, but also how to hide their intentions from the opponent. Oh my god, I'm only now realizing how deep this spear went into his flesh. Like, what the fuck? The whole spearhead is in there. How the fuck is that possible? He's wearing armor. Even if the spear got through, I highly doubt it would have gotten that deep. Holy shit. Remember what I told you just a few moments ago? Blades going through plate armor? Not happening, although Hollywood loves to show it. As the great Metatron once said,
"Look how flexible this piece of leather is. Armor doesn't exist. It doesn't. It's not true. It's an illusion, it's a decoration, it's a myth."
Seriously? Why? Why do you do this to me? I just talked about how a sword going through metal armor is stupid, and that's how you choose to end him, Achilles? Seriously? His head is completely exposed. His neck is completely exposed. But you chose to stab him through the armor? I don't even know what to say at this point. Bitch, my son is gonna grow up without a father because of you. Don't you fucking touch me. And that's it for my ranting. I love dissecting movies and games, as you might have noticed, especially when talking about a subject that I love, like historical combat, so I had a lot of fun writing this video. The Bronze Age is not the period I'm most familiar with, so there was some heavy research for this video. I hope it was worth it. I hope it was interesting to watch. Please like and share the fuck out of this video. You would be helping me a lot. And subscribe. Join us in our spaceship. Thanks for watching, and I'm flying away for tonight.